Hey, and we're live, I think, here on Facebook. Sorry about the technical difficulties that we've been having. Apparently Facebook and Zoom are not playing nicely together right now, and so we are doing a different format, and we'll be answering your questions. It was going to be Tori and I kind of dialoguing around questions that you guys have submitted and that you submit through the live stream. Now you're just stuck with me, and we'll be talking through the questions that you submit in the comments, and I'll be responding to them. And so the first question that we've got is that many of us that were already struggling with loneliness, in particular, that related to grief or loss, our feelings that loneliness are even more and heavier because of the isolation that you're experiencing. What suggestions do you have to help us grieve with hope in this season? It's a great question. That God has created us to co-regulate. That is, to navigate the difficulties and struggles that we experience in life by way of connecting and relating to other human beings, the important people within our life. And so in a season where you're isolated and you're not able to connect with the people that are closest to you and that you look to and depend on to provide that support, you're going to have an increased sense of heaviness. It's the need that we have that the scriptures talk about in terms of bearing one another's burdens, that bearing those burdens on our own is overwhelming, and God just didn't design us to function like that. So during this season, as you're going through stuff that's already hard, it's really important that you use every avenue that you can to try to stay connected with other people and the important people within your life. Some folks are doing that by way of group chats and hangouts with family members or friends that are close, and making a point on a regular basis to block out some time for community. Others are doing that through increased texting and messaging, or using the different kind of WhatsApp apps or Marco Polo, things that can enable a higher level of interaction. But really that the voice-to-voice and face-to-face connection with other people, and continuing to reach out to them and share what it is that you're going through and allow them to be there for you, is the best way for you to navigate through this crisis and still allow your heart to grieve and navigate the challenges that you're facing. So it's a great question, and one that a lot of people are trying to figure out how to navigate during this season. So if you're just joining, we've had some technical difficulties that's prevented us from using the platform we were going to use to do this live feed. And so there's put your comments, your questions down in the feed. We'll try to get to them, and I'll answer them and speak to those things and be able to kind of answer your questions, and just want to support you during this time. That you're isolated. A lot of folks aren't able to connect with family and friends the way that you could before. And we're all trying to figure out, how do we get through this the best that we can? And as a practice, and myself, I want to be there for you to be able to answer those questions that can help you be healthy, help you be able to hopefully even grow through the midst of this. That struggles in life are an avenue through which God produces maturity and brings to the surface the things in our life that really need healing and that we need to work through. So there's a way in which that if we allow it, this process can actually bring to our attention the things that maybe were not intense enough or weren't holding us back enough to address directly before, but now are right up in our face and on top of our mind because of the struggle, and giving us the opportunity to work through those things and find healing. So we've got another question that says, what steps can I take during quarantine to promote mental health? So take a step back from Netflix for a little bit, and that the same kinds of practices that help us and to stay spiritually grounded and mentally and emotionally grounded, and when we're outside of this crisis, are still relevant during this crisis, but we can get away from them because our routine is interrupted. And so things like a morning quiet time, where we're creating space in our life to be quiet before the Lord and allow our heart to be settled, to allow ourselves to pray or journal out through the stressors, the anxieties, the weights that we're feeling on our heart. And if those of you that aren't familiar with prayer journaling, it's similar to what you see David doing in the Psalms, where he is pouring his heart out before God on paper. It's a capturing, it's a process journaling of the anxieties and fears and weights that I'm feeling internally through a written format, where I just offer up my heart before the Lord by wrapping words around it in a writing and paper format. It can be a really great way, in combination with meditation and the morning quiet time, to quiet your heart before the Lord and to lay those things out there that are creating angst and anxiety for you. So attending to that morning quiet time, that time in the scriptures, meditation on God's word that helps to center and ground you in spiritually as well as emotionally. Another component that you want to pay attention to is your exercise. It's easy to get off of the physical regimen and exercise that you would normally engage when your schedule's out of whack. But finding ways to get outside and get exercise, or to do calisthenics or a kind of video guided exercise routine while you're at home is a great way to metabolize stress hormones and help the body be able to maintain that chemical homeostasis, that balance within the body. And so you want to continue to attend to your exercise. Sometimes just getting outside and having some vitamin D therapy, allowing the sunshine to be on your face and on your skin is a significant part of being able to maintain mood. And so we don't want to neglect getting some sunshine and being outside, even though we're quarantined in a way that we're needing to practice social distancing and keep that space in between us. We can still be outside, enjoy the fresh air, allow the sunshine to lift our heads, lift our moods. That's a valuable piece to attend to. And then again, our diet, that it's easy when we're out of our routine to be watching Netflix and scarfing down on less than nutritious food. And all of those things really add up. We're staying up late, our sleep routine's out of whack because we don't necessarily have our scheduled morning time that we've got to get up. So our body is feeling the stress of being outside of its normal sleep routine. Our diet's messed up because we're outside of our normal eating and dietary routine. Exercise routine is thrown off. And then you layer on top of that the decreased interaction and connection with the important people in our life. And that's a recipe for depression and anxiety. So attending to those things, those basic self-care pieces in a intentional way, so that we're getting the sleep we need, we're getting the exercise that we need, our body's getting the nutrition that we need, we're making that quiet time to engage spiritually and be able to get grounded in our heart around the things that are going on around us, as opposed to just avoiding thinking about those things or avoiding the potential conflicts and tensions by leaning into social media or TV, Netflix, or gaming in order to distract oneself from those things. And neglecting the self-care is kind of what we want to be intentional about managing. We've got another question, and it says, how can I support my children's mental health during the course of the quarantine? It's a good question. With school being out and a lot of folks engaging homeschooling for the first time, there's this sense of how do I pick up where my kids have left off education-wise, and how do I not neglect their educational needs when we're in the midst of this crisis. And so there's a lot of stress and anxiety about that. And first I want to say that the need that your kids have that's greater than their educational need is just a sense of structure and stability with you. That if you are putting pressure on yourself to try to recreate their educational experience, that is a new learning environment for them. It's a new role for you. And the stress and the anxiety between the two really rules out most learning for kids. And so the first priority is to establish a routine for your family that works for you as parent and works for them as a kid. It doesn't necessarily have to be super heavily weighted in academics right now. It's more about having their mind be engaged in something useful, stimulating, and meaningful. And for you to be in a mood, in a place that you can connect with them and engage relational interaction. That their sense of peace of mind, their sense of anxiety is going to track closely to yours. Like, you can't take care of the kids' mental health needs through this without taking care of your own. It just doesn't work. That they're going to track with you. So if you are taking care of yourself and the things that we talked about earlier about the how do I take care of my own mental health? How do I do self-care in the midst of this? If you're doing those things, it's going to help position you to be able to be calm, collected, have your anxiety level be lower in a way that allows you to relationally interact and connect with your kids in a way that's going to help them to have a lower anxiety level and to be in a good place. Understand that they also have those social needs for connection. In the same way that we talked about for adults, the need to prioritize and make space for interacting with the people who love you and whom you love, and to feel their support and their encouragement, to laugh together. Your kids have that same need. And so being intentional about creating opportunities for them to engage with their friends, whether that's using a Google Hangouts or some sort of chat software to enable them to see their face or interact with them. And to some extent, even some gaming opportunities that, while that may not be your favorite thing as a parent to have your kids engaged in a game, that for them to be able to get in a group gaming environment where they can hear their friends, talk to their friends, and engage a activity with their friends in that context is a way that they can continue to have some social interaction and feel a connection with their peers in a way that's going to help them be able to track through this better. All the things self-care wise for adults would say are true for the kids also, in terms of maintaining a routine in terms of sleep and wake cycles, diet, and attaining to regular meals, nutritious food, being able to get out and have some sunshine, exercise. All of that is applicable to your children as well. So we've got another question that's come in, says, the constant stress and anxiety from coronavirus is making relationships tense at home. What can I do about this? Yeah, so anxiety and stress is contagious. Right? And so if I'm anxious, the people around me are going to pick up on that and are inclined to experience heightened levels of anxiety as well. And if they're engaging things that are amping up that anxiety for them, the two are going to feed off of each other, and just everybody's going to be tense, which is no fun for anybody, not helpful for anybody. Things that you can do to try to mitigate that or manage that some are really limit your contact with the news stream and the news feed. It's important to stay educated. It's important to stay aware of what's happening amongst this crisis. But the 24/7 or 8 to 10 hours a day of just constantly being bombarded with the pieces of information around this are not helpful to you. That it will be a lot better for you to break that up into increments. Maybe you check it early in the day. Maybe you check in again around lunchtime. Maybe again checking in late in the day around dinner time, and then repeating that, where we're taking maybe 15, 20 minutes to check up on what are the latest updates and useful information that's coming forward. But cumulatively, even if you take 20 minutes a day, 3 times a day, we're talking about an hour of exposure to that stream, as opposed to having it continually be reading one article to the next, one news blurb to the next, that feeds that sense of anxiety and fear within the body, and that angst response, that fear response is an important part of how God made us, that it alerts us to danger so that we can take refuge, so that we can move to safety. And that's an important and valuable response within our body that we want to respect and appreciate. But if we're continually pressing that button, kind of continually exposing that part of our brain to those fear signals and those threat and danger signals, it continually keeps our body amped up. And there's really not anything that you gain from that. That it goes way beyond staying informed to a way that you're just triggering your anxiety system and that fear system continuously on an ongoing basis. So one of the biggest things that you can do is to limit your exposure to those anxiety-producing stimuli. Another component of the tension that folks are experiencing is the relational tension. That there maybe were relational tensions that existed prior to the crises, but life and its busyness created opportunity to avoid those things and to not have to interact directly around those things. And now there's maybe less distraction, kind of trapped in the same house, in the same roof. We don't have work to focus on in the same way that we did before. And so those things are coming to the surface. And you could just try to find new and more inventive ways to avoid that. But you could also take it as an opportunity to take a look at those things and really create some space within your life and relationship to begin to dialogue around some of those things that maybe we've been avoiding for some time. So there's a way in which you can turn this around and turn that tension around into an opportunity for relational growth and healing. And I would love to see that. I think that would really allow out of this crisis some really good things to happen for your family. I've got another question. It says, can you recommend any strategies for family unity or sibling unity during this season? We're all running against each other much more than we used to, and conflicts arise, and just looking for some ideas about how to bring families together more than apart. It's a good question. Similar to what we've talked about before, but we need to create some space for alone time, which maybe sounds the opposite of what the question's asking. But if we're going to have meaningful and quality time together, we need to have some individual space. If we've got the room around the house, that can look like play alone time. We're going to have kids segmented out to different rooms, parents segmented out, and we set an hour period of time where we're going to engage some sort of activity, reading a book, playing with Legos, playing with dolls, listening to an audiobook, doing something, but we're doing it alone as the kids, every member of the family kind of spread out. That allows that space to be focused, have some space away from interactions with each other, and have that separateness, which then you can turn around and engage a group activity that we're able to come back to with a little less tension. Whether that's a board game, whether that's a family movie, whether that's cooking a meal together, and trying to think through what are our favorite foods, creating a menu for the week together of what each person would like to have for different meals in the day, and then engaging cooking together as a family. That having the alone space allows us also to come back and engage group activities without having just that constant grind that if we're all in the same room all the time, we're all running into each other all the time. There's just everything from normal irritation to just irritation that comes from boredom. Our kids get bored and they start being obnoxious and irritating to their parents and one another just out of the boredom. But so a balance between the individual space, and figuring out ways to create individual space when we're all under the same roof, to being able to come back together and engage group activities that are relational and connective for us. So that's what I would recommend for weighing out and managing just the sibling conflict and family tension that is arising from everybody being home and everybody indoors. Next question we've got is, my wife is a strong extrovert, so isolation is very difficult for her. How can I do a good job supporting her? Yeah, a lot of extroverts are feeling the pain right now. That one of their needs and high needs is be able to have that social interaction and engagement. And the isolation or trying to engage through text or messaging is just not the same. So similar to the statement with the kids, when it comes to you and your spouse, it's important for you to both to have the individual time, alone time, as well as the together time. Because one of the things that will happen is we're just around each other all the time. And so for the introvert in the relationship, the tank is on empty. And then they're not able to show up well with their spouse who's needing from them, because they've given and they're given, and then their tank is just zeroed out. If we're not taking any time for you as the non-extrovert in the family or in the relationship to be able to have some solidarity in a way that helps to restore you, some solitude that helps to breathe life into you, then you're not going to have very much to give out and engage with your wife around. And so while it may seem counterproductive in terms of how do I support my extrovert spouse, will take solitude, but one enables the other. That good self-care actually enables us to show up well and engage others. And your wife is going to prefer engaging with you when you're alive and engaging, more than just having your body in the room. That if you're wrung out and you haven't done good self-care and you're not taking care of the things that you need in order to show up well, then just having your body around isn't going to be all that fulfilling for her. So first thing I would say, make sure that you're being aware of what it is that you need in order to show up as your best self. Then secondly, be intentional about creating that space and talking about that with your spouse. Because if she doesn't know what's going on with you, she doesn't know how to read what you're doing. Way better for you to have a conversation that says, hey, I need just some solitude for a little bit. So I'm going to go to this room or that room, or go for a walk, or go out to my car and sit in my car in the driveway, listen to some music, read a book. I'm just going to take some one time, or just sit there in the quiet and allow myself to recharge a little bit. And then when I come back, why don't we see if we can't either engage some activity, or even better, see if we can't set up kind of a virtual double date with a couple that we really enjoy and that is fun for both of us, and kind of schedule something where we can have kind of like a virtual dinner date, right? Even when we're sitting at the table, we've got the computer, the laptop, iPad set up, and are able to pipe in our friends and share in some relational connecting with each other, even though we're not in the same room. And if we have a game plan together and we can be on the same page, that's going to really help reduce that tension. Because instead of it feeling like my needs are being neglected or your needs are being neglected or both of our needs are being neglected, and when we can put a plan around it that says what you need matters to me, I care about what it is that you're experiencing, and I want to be there for you, and recognize that my needs matter, and I know that you care about them, and you want to be there for me. Let's come up with a plan that can really speak to both of our needs, our differences, the way we're different from each other, and still feel connected with one another. The plan helps reduce anxiety that my needs aren't going to be cared for. And so that's kind of what I would put out there and recommend in terms of a game plan for how to navigate that extroversion versus introversion dynamic in the midst of the crises. See what else we got. Everyone is talking about how life has slowed down, but I feel like my life has ramped up so much I can barely keep up with anything. I find myself reacting at my kids or our spouse with basic tasks like schoolwork or making a meal. How do I prioritize the demands on my schedule while not neglecting the relationships around me? It's a good question. That there's not everybody's life has slowed down in the midst of this. We've got a lot of frontline folks, or we've got folks that are in ministry context where they're trying to figure out how do I transition the ministry that we engaged in person on Sunday morning into caring for people spiritually through different mediums. And that's creating a lot more work and task. You've got business owners trying to figure out how they reinvent their business in a way to continue to be relevant and continue to stay afloat. And amidst the crises that's going on, you have moms that are on top of their side hustle that they've been working and have now the educational pieces and increase engagement with their kids, and the demands of the work that they've been doing or the business that they've been building has not decreased at all. So not everybody's situation is such of having a whole lot of free time on their hands during the midst of this. And so it's a juggling act of now I have more things that I need to engage, more things that I have to work through. And prioritize is really the key word in that question and part of the answer. That there's a need to recognize that you are finite. There's only so many hours in a day, and that there are things that are not going to get done. There are things that are balls that are going to be dropped. Because it's just impossible for you to do all the different things. So you need to grieve that for a minute, right? That sometimes the fight has been, how do I not drop any of the balls? How do I juggle all of these things? I can't keep doing this. I'm engaging at a level that's beyond my capabilities. I'm stretched too thin. I'm running on empty. The first step in that is accepting that you can't keep going like this, that you are finite, and God didn't intend for you to be able to do everything all the time. So accepting that some of the balls are going to drop is probably the first step. When you can grieve through that and go, okay, that's just a reality that I've got to accept. The next question then becomes, so which balls do I let drop? Because you can either try to juggle everything, you can't juggle everything, and this ball drops or that ball drops, and it's not really intentional as to which ones we're going to let go or back burner or not focus on. It's just whatever one happens to drop at that moment, which may mean the more important ones drop while less important things get done. By being intentional about deciding what I'm going to let drop, you can make sure that you continue to win in the things that matter most. For example, one of the things that are in that question is, what about the relationship pieces? The relationships in your life, whether it be with your kids, your spouse, your friends, your colleagues, those matter a whole lot more than any of the other tasks. That those are going to be the things that make life matter when we get out of this. If you get all the stuff done, but your relationships go by the wayside through the course of this, you're going to be at a lot bigger loss than if relationally you're in a secure and attached and connected and healthy place and some of the stuff didn't get done. So think about prioritizing people over tasks. Specifically, when we're thinking about kids, you're generally speaking, your kids are not going to have the course of their life altered in terms of their academic pursuits and abilities by taking a few months off of focused academic pursuit. Now, that's not a great fit for everybody, but in terms of happiness, in terms of well-being, in terms of really even academic future, having a few months off from school is not going to set them back for the rest of their life. And so if we are having difficulty juggling the academic pieces along with the relational pieces and the other components, consider pressing pause on that. It's far more important that you be able to engage your kids in a more relaxed state and be able to help them manage the anxiety of getting through this crisis, and for you to be a safe place for them to be able to connect and process the emotions that they're going through in this process and to attend to those things, than it is to keep their math going kind of through this season. Not that math isn't important, but there'll be time to get back to that and play catch up with that. That taking a break from that to focus on the relational components of it is a worthwhile trade-off. You also want to think about some of the ways in which you unplug. Like, there are things that we can do to try to unplug that are really not as restorative as other activities. Like, sometimes we're down at the bottom of the barrel, and then we plug in the Netflix for a couple of hours or kind of binge through some episodes. Nothing wrong with Netflix or catching up with shows that you enjoy or sharing them with your family or your spouse. I'm not dogging on Netflix at all, but it's not as restorative as, say, solitude. That taking some space and just sitting in a room, or in the corner of a room where you're facing a wall or out a window with your beats on, and so you're alone with your thoughts with some instrumental music or quiet, that setting still and allowing space for what's in here to settle instead of just distracting with images, videos, TV here, is a lot more restorative to you. And so consider your downtime and try to engage activities that are less distraction and more maybe focused relaxation and meditation. That some of us, rather than engaging Netflix unplug, you need a nap. Like, your body just needs the rest. Closing your eyes, slowing down and coming to a stop, allows the body and the mind a restorative process that allows you to kind of wake from an hour-long nap a lot more rested and a lot more ready to take on the different things of the day than an hour-long break watching an episode of something. That engaging the things that are going to help be restorative for your body so that you can show up, and prioritizing those things and making the most use out of the rest is going to be the thing that's most helpful to you. Consider chunking things into focused blocks of time. That as much as we can, try to avoid jumping between tasks. That every time multitasking has really been debunked neurologically, neuroscience-wise. So we don't really have the ability to multitask like we used to think we could. And that trying to really burns a lot more psychological energy than focused work in a singular direction. And so rather than trying to juggle several things at once, that try limiting the focus of things into a handful of things that are of highest priority and getting those things knocked out. There's a great book that came out a few years ago called Eat That Frog that really talks through the concept of identifying the highest impact things, not necessarily the easiest things, because we can stay really busy chasing things that aren't as meaningful in an attempt to psychologically avoid the things that are really meaningful but are hard and require a larger block of time and effort to get done. In reality, and especially in seasons like this where some balls are going to be dropped and we have to choose which ones to drop, that being really intentional in our to-do lists and identifying what are the highest impact items. How do I prioritize them up so that those don't drop, and just choose to intentionally let go, or at least be backburnered, other items is a strategy that will be really significant to you nailing or at least maintaining the things that matter most and feeling less overwhelmed. You shouldn't exert every last ounce of energy trying to get every last item on the to-do list done, which for some personalities is harder than others to do. But intentionally not letting some things get done in order to use that time in restorative ways is really going to be more effective for you. See what else we got. Since I'm a registered nurse, I feel so much anger when I see people gathering into groups. I want to tell them to not do that, but is it my place? I feel like it is, especially my relatives. That's a really complicated question. Seems simple enough on the surface, but trying to weigh out relationally, where do I have voice and where does social pressure come into play in terms of a community engaging things that are for the good of the larger community. I'd say there's two things to navigate beginning. One is kind of working through internally the experience that's happening for you. One way that you can do this is to write a letter to the folks standing outside your window, right? Where you really allow yourself to vent the thoughts and emotions that are part of that impulse that are coming out of that anger, and to say exactly what you feel like you want to say, exactly the way that you feel like saying it, which totally may not be appropriate to actually communicate, right? So I'm not talking about a letter that you slip underneath their door. I'm talking about a journaling exercise that you do on your own in order to process the emotions that you're experiencing. It'll really allow the initial aggression and intensity of your emotion to get out and help you be able to identify the more vulnerable emotions that are underneath that. You know, that a lot of times underneath the aggressive intensity externally is fear that we're processing about what's going to happen and what the choices that others are making are going to mean for themselves or for others. And when we can get at and wrap words around and validate the emotions that underlie that, it's a lot better for us in our own mental and emotional health. Because there's a way in which we can allow things that are outside of our control, the choices of others, to really mess with us in our own internal sense of well-being and balance. And since there's a lot of things that are outside of our control right now, it's really important to guard against and allowing those things that are outside of our control from really ruining our own mood and disposition. After we have been able to kind of make space for that, process through that, identify the more vulnerable core emotions that lie underneath that, sometimes it can be helpful to write a second letter. And the second letter tends to be more constructive in helping us formulate some words that speak from our heart instead of just out of the intensity of our anger or aggression in that moment. And that might produce some conversations that are worth having with others. and might be worth sharing your heart with them. But you want to think through what kind of response you're expecting as well, and that we can go into it with the only positive outcome to be if we're able to convince them that they should think about and see it the way that we do and act the way that we think that they should act. And we can have all of the best case built as to why they should see it the way we do and what authorities in medicine and important people in the management of this crisis, all the facts and data and information, we can build a really solid case. But at the end of the day, people aren't going to change their perspective, typically speaking, because you're making a really good case as to why they're wrong. Like, it's not an intellectual kind of argument that even if they concede that you're right, a man convinced against his will is of the same mind still, one author put it. That even though you've convinced them against their will that you're right and they're wrong, the chances of them then changing their behavior, doing anything different, are really low. And so being able to communicate a respect for them as you share your valid concerns and fears and frustration about their choices and how that impacts you is what we're after. That sets it up to have the best case for success. But also having within that an acceptance that they still may not see it the way that you do. And having to accept that no matter what side of the issue you stand on, that's going to be a case. There's going to be people that you care about or people around you that don't see it the same way as you do. And your ability to be able to be okay with that within yourself, not that you agree with that, that's not what I mean by okay with that, but to be able to do what you can in terms of speaking what you feel like you need to share, especially if they're people that matter to you and that are a part of your life, right? Not just random strangers, but family members, relatives, those that you're going to have Thanksgiving dinner with later this year, hopefully in person. We're not still quarantining at that juncture, but you're going to sit across from the table with them and continue a relationship with them, treating them with respect and respecting that they may not see it the same way as you is key. Think about this for a moment from a spiritual perspective, right? That in our interactions with our Creator, that God has given us the capability to not only not agree with Him, but also to act in ways that are inconsistent with how He wants us to act. Now, that sort of limited autonomy that He gives us over our life is not something that He had to allow us. But He's chosen to create us in such a way that we have the ability to make choices even when they're not the right choices, even when they're not good choices, even when they're choices that are detrimental to us. And those choices have consequence on us and our relationship with Him, but He still allows us to the limited autonomy around our life to be able to make those choices. And if God chooses to do that, to relate to us in that way, we really don't have a place for violating that autonomy, kind of superseding and extending beyond that. So we need to respect others' people's autonomy in making choices that are maybe not the best choices or not the right choices. And ultimately, we entrust them to the Holy Spirit, who's able to bring conviction and lead into truth in ways that we never can. That He's able to speak to their heart and deal with them around those things and to lead them to the decisions that they need to make in a way that our words, and certainly our words spoken in anger, will never enable, make possible. Other questions that come in. What are your thoughts on a couple that is pregnant during this time, due at the end of June? Yeah, so a little bit scary, not knowing how all this is going to affect labor and delivery, not knowing how this is going to affect who can be there for the delivery. I've got clients and know folks that are that are due and have important family members to them that are not going to be able to be there with them at the hospital, and limited availability for the father to be at the hospital. And there's grief and there's angst that's associated with that we really have to navigate through. We have to realize and identify the fears and anxieties that we have around that situation, and to be able to handle each one individually. Because what can happen is we just kind of put them out of our mind, try not to think about them, which really doesn't make them go away. It doesn't really resolve them. Better approach is to lean into them and be able to be intentional about what is it that I'm afraid of here? What is it that's producing anxiety? What is it that's creating sadness for me? And how do I allow space to address those things? That is, how do I grieve the things that are losses, the things that are not going to be able to happen that I want? And then I want to have, whether it be a parent at the birth or other kinds of things that you envisioned and how this would go that are just not going to happen. And there's real loss that's a part of that. Well, attending to that loss and allowing our heart to grieve through that enables us to move to acceptance. And that grief is that process. Grief is the process by which we accept the things we can't change. And so when we're able to move through that grief to acceptance, we can come to peace with it, even though it's not going to happen the way that we want to. And that peace is what we're after, that we can abide in the peace that God desires for us and wants us to have in the midst of the storm and the chaos that's going around us that's outside of our control. So not running from, not avoiding those things, but instead identifying them, leaning into them, and figuring out what each piece of that needs. What are the pieces that we need to grieve? What are the pieces that we need to develop a plan for in order to address whatever it is that's taking place there? And being able to identify the fears that we have about the things that we can't control. What if I get sick? What if I get the virus? How will that affect me? How might that affect pregnancy? Things that we don't have answers to, and things that we can take a level of precaution around, but don't have the ability to ultimately control. That it brings us back to that place of validating the fear that we have as being legitimate, and also surrendering that and having to trust the Lord to be able to see us through that too, if it's something that we face, that His grace is sufficient for that scenario, if it's what we end up having to face and go through as well. Another question says, as a single mom, just attending to the basic needs of some of my special needs kids, I'm overwhelmed and stressed out. I used to manage this well with schedule, self-care, while the kids were in school with outside support. With time constraints and the loss of support, what might some quick coping strategies be to use during the day? Wow, man, my heart goes out to you. It's one of the kind of toughest kinds of scenarios. Such limited support, limited resources, overwhelming need that suddenly is all on your plate. And there's a reality of a level of survival that you're trying to engage. And that there's a need to have grace with yourself as you walk through this situation, that you're not going to be able to handle all the things the way that you wish you could. Back to an earlier question that we had, that part of this is about being able to grieve the things that are going to get dropped and come to accept that in terms of my parenting, there are things that I'm not going to be able to do that I like to be able to do. That in terms of the house and household chores and responsibilities and just maintaining the house, I'm not going to be able to keep up with. That I'm going to have to make some choices about what I intentionally let go. And even after I do that, my list of things that I'm going to continue trying to keep the balls in the air is probably going to have to get cut in half. And some things that you really hate to have not be maintained are probably not going to be able to, because it's not a matter of how valuable those things are. It's about facing the reality of the finite nature of what exists inside of you. And so you really have to get narrow in your focus on what are the things that are absolute musts. And many of them are pretty basic, right? That you and the children need to eat. Making sure that we're having regular meals of nutritious food is high on the priority list. Because if we're not fueling our body, then we don't have the mental and emotional resources that we need to deal with stress and deal with the difficulty of the crises. So you got to make sure that that's happening. Same thing with fluids, water, hydrating, that sort of thing. Exercise. And that exercise metabolizes stress hormones. When you're in the midst of an incredibly stressful situation, doing things to offset the buildup of those stress hormones in your body is absolutely critical. It's essential. And so prioritizing exercise is necessary for you to survive and for you to be able to enable the survival of the kids, whether from themselves, from yourself, or their siblings, right? It's basic kinds of stuff. The need for you to be able to get sleep, because if your brain doesn't sleep, bad things happen. So if you're not getting adequate sleep, then you can't show up well. And so hopefully what you're taking away from the examples are just the basics of survival have to be prioritized as the most important thing on the list. And if you can check those boxes, we'll call that a win. Anything beyond that is like bonus. It's icing on the cake. Right? I mean, anything beyond that is bonus, icing on the cake. So sometimes that means making compromises that you loathe, right? Which may mean allowing your kids, or some of your kids, if not all your kids, to lean into more screen time than you like. Right? You may loathe having them babysit in front of Disney Plus or in front of PBS or VeggieTales or their YouTube channel that is their favorite entertainment. But right now, when you've got all of these other pieces that need your attention and other kids that need your attention, it's just the way that it's got to be. Not because it's what you prefer. It's not because it's the way it's always going to be. But right now, it is what it is. And so same thing with food, right? We want to make sure that our kids are eating nutritious food. But there may be compromises that we make in that regards as well. Things that we're doing that are quick and fast kinds of meals that still have nutritional value. Not talking about just feeding them straight Doritos, but maybe not preparing meals in the same way or with the same ingredients that you otherwise would, because doing it that way takes 2 hours versus putting something together that's lunch meat sandwiches that you can put together in 15 minutes means having an hour and 45 minutes difference of time that can be allocated to other things. There are compromises that are not going to be the end of the world, are unpleasant, aren't what you prefer, aren't what you want to do, but are things you have to grieve and accept that I can't do what I'd like to do. I'm going to have to make some compromises because there's just more to do than is possible. So in terms of kind of quick coping strategies, I would love to be able to just say, do this, and it would be like a blue pill that gives you limitless energy and brings your focus back into place and your mood down so that you're stable and able to engage all that life is throwing at you without breaking a sweat? I don't know any. There's not any quick fixes. There's not any easy solutions. There's really just kind of a disciplined approach to tending to the pieces that really matter and that will keep enabling you to put one foot in front of the other while you get through the current crises and life opens back up in a way that you're able to lean on the other supports that you normally would. I've got a question here. It says, I'm finding that being around depressing people all the time is extremely draining. That's true. That's true. I'm assuming you're talking about your family or those that live in your household, right? Or maybe coworkers. I'm not sure who the depressing people are that you're hanging around with all the time. Normally, I would say limit your contact with those individuals. Right? Maybe you can't do that, or maybe it's more challenging. Back to earlier, again, things that we've talked about before, attending to your own self-care is really key in maintaining what you need in order to be able to show up well, which may mean getting creative with how to go about doing that. Could be you sitting out in your car in the driveway, right? Again, closing the door and just sitting in the quiet, reading a book out there, rolling the window down, that in order to get some space away from the other individuals in the house, in order to be able to have that quiet time, in order to be able to engage something that's restorative. Again, remember that generally speaking, while Netflix, YouTube, Facebook, kind of scrolling through those things is a mental distraction, they're not really restorative for you. And so they can be entertaining and they can be fun and they have their place, but don't confuse them with restorative practices, because you can engage that for a long time and not feel any more renewed at the end of that time than you did when you started that time. You may have been entertained, you may have been distracted, and maybe a nice mental break away from the things that are stressing you out. But it's not going to restore you. So focus on activities that are restorative for you. And maybe you need to spend some time figuring out what that is for you and really getting to know yourself and understand what are the kinds of practices and activities that I can engage that will be restorative for me and really help me have resources to face the challenges that are going on in my life. Next questions. It says, how do I deal with the emotion, specifically fear? How do I deal with fear when you suspect you're positive for coronavirus? I still can't get tested to confirm, yet knowing you're immune compromised with multiple complications medically and the morbidity risks are legitimately high. Let's see. I know where my salvation lies, but that doesn't mean I'm feeling ready to die. I still want to see my kids grow up, and I know I should desire reunification with Christ, but struggle with grappling with those emotions. Some of those fears are real for me as I walk through this. Most of the time, I can logic my way through being calm and covering up in prayer, but other moments seem overwhelming and difficult to process. Where is the balance of not acting out of fear, but still being prepared for an outcome that might not be positive, at the same time not wanting to be a total Debbie Downer? A totally legitimate question, and I appreciate you asking it, because there's reality, there's hysteria, where we kind of get worked up and have fear over misinformation and can kind of be in a panic in a way that's not helpful. But there's legitimate risk. There's legitimate harm that we can be susceptible to. And we want to educate ourselves and take practical steps towards mitigating risk and following the medically recommended advice in terms of how to care for one's body and self, kind of through the sickness if you do have it. But then there's this emotional side, right, of how do we navigate through what we can't control and what we can't change. that there's a element of grief that we pass through in just grieving what's possible, right? That instead of running away from or kind of distracting ourselves, whether that through spiritualized methods that we're going to pray about it, give to God, and not think about it, and kind of do that piece, or through other methodologies of leaning into other kinds of distraction, that instead of running away from that, that we have to just lean into it. What I mean by that is going, okay, so what I do all the things that I know to do in terms of caring for myself and precautions to take, right? But what if I can't control the outcome of this? What's going to happen? What might happen? What's the worst case scenario? And facing the reality of some of those potential loss. It's true, you don't want to die. It's true, you do want to be there for your kids. And yet that may not be an option. And it's hard to sit and face that, but coming to terms with that, acknowledging it and coming to terms with it, kind of grieving through what that would mean, is how we get through to acceptance, which enables us to come to peace with those scenarios. That doesn't mean we want those scenarios. That doesn't mean that somehow we're indifferent as to the outcome. It just means that we move through the process of grieving what we can't control or change and able to come to acceptance that allows us to have peace. And in that peace, we are able to navigate the realities of our situation a lot better. And we're actually able physiologically, immune system wise, able to deal with and fight off disease, sickness, be more restorative than we are when we're racked with anxiety and fear. That the stress hormones that are associated with anxiety and fear actually suppress our immune system and make us more susceptible to sickness and weaken our ability to fight off sickness. And so in an indirect way, by of the worst case scenario and being able to come to peace with that, it actually equips us to better navigate and overcome that challenge and avoid the feared outcome to begin with. So those are the pieces that I'd recommend, and there's a number of different resources that you can access around anxiety and managing anxiety and grieving, kind of chronic illness, and the uncertainties that come with that, that would be good to tap into as a guide for doing so. Thank you for the question. I appreciate that. I appreciate those that are kind of tuned in and trying to figure out how to navigate through this crisis and care for their relationships, care for themselves through the course of this. And I appreciate that growth orientedness, right? That there's that part of you that doesn't want to just put your head down and bury it in the sand and get buried by this, but to be able to take and use it as an opportunity to grow, to use it as an opportunity to mature, and to allow the struggle of the circumstances to be transformative to you. As we wrap up, I just want to pray a blessing over you, and we'll set up another Q&A in some more time, and hopefully our technology will work better for us this time or next time. But I want to pray a blessing over you and your family as you're navigating through this. Father, I thank you for your constantness. Lord, that this crisis has taken us by surprise, but it's no surprise to you. You knew that we would be going through this. You knew the struggles that would be a part of this. And your grace is sufficient for us. We declare our dependence on you. Lord, our hope and our confidence are anchored in you. And we trust you to lead us through this. And I just pray that your peace would be on all those that are navigating through this. Lord, that as they look to you, that they would experience your peace and your direction. Lord, that you would help them identify and see the ways in which you want to bless them through the struggle of this crisis, and that you would empower them by your Spirit to be able to glean from it the benefit that you want for their life. And Lord, that you would be glorified in them and through them in the midst of this crisis. We trust you and put all of our hope in you. In Jesus' name, amen. Love you guys. If there's other questions that you have or resources that you would like to see, feel free to message us. Use the Asking for a Friend form on the website, and we'll continue to create resources for you that can hopefully help you navigate this crisis in the best way possible. Until then, be blessed, and we'll talk with you later.